Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro Revenge Story. This has all been finalized, so I decided to post it. For obvious reasons, I didn't want to post it while it was ongoing. In spring 2024, I bought a house trailer and decided to rent it out. It needed some work, so I posted 2 months free rent for putting carpet down in the living room, hooking up the hot water heater, and putting in a toilet. Got a nice couple, Megan and Tyler, with a newborn willing to do it. Great. No lease, month to month. No security deposit, and the rent was $450 a month. So they did the work, so I didn't ask for rent for 2 months. Everything was fine. Side note, there are a few little state laws that come into play. If you don't pay rent for 3 consecutive months, you are considered a squatter, which means the landlord doesn't have to fix the property and can actually padlock it and deny you entry. If you're on house arrest and get formally evicted, you could be violated for it. Also, you can be formally evicted even if you have already moved out, so the landlord can get rent due. Also, even though there are eviction bans, if it happened before the ban, then it can still go through, plus a few other conditions that still allow someone to be evicted. It's up to the judge, really. Fast forward 5 months and still no rent money. Yes, they had a newborn and they were young and didn't have a lot of money, but Tyler could spend $1,500 on a new engine for his project car. They could afford to go out to eat and spend money on electronics, but no rent. When I finally confronted Tyler about the payments, he just shrugged and said, "We've been tight on cash, man. The baby needs things." "I understand that," I replied, "but we had an agreement. You've made 0 payments in 3 months. "We'll catch up. Don't worry about it," he said, turning back to his car parts. So after that 3rd month, I did nothing. The weather was turning cold. I didn't put in the furnace like I promised, and if they hadn't had a newborn, I would have padlocked the house. They were bragging about their tax refund. I gave them a shot to catch up, and they basically said that they knew their rights and were in a rent strike. Illegally, I might add. You will see later. "We got our tax return," Megan texted me. "We're planning a trip to the beach next month." I responded immediately. "That's great. How about catching up on some of that back rent first?" "We're actually on a rent strike until you fix the heating," came the reply. "We know our rights." COVID happened. Tyler got laid off, so I gave them a break. When he went back to work, I asked for back rent again and was told to duck off. I finally had enough. I told them they had 14 days to get out, or I was doing a formal eviction, and seeing he was on house arrest, he knew what that meant. "Look," I said during my final visit, "I've been patient, but you need to either pay up or move out in 2 weeks." "You can't evict us," Tyler said, crossing his arms. "There's a pandemic." "Your house arrest situation complicates things," I reminded him. "A formal eviction could send you back to jail. I'm trying to help you avoid that." I honestly was trying to keep him from having to go back to jail and keep an eviction off of their record. I was trying to be nice and civil. So they left, and I cut my losses until I checked the property. Everything they put in, they removed. Everything they got free rent for was gone. I got pissed and filed for a formal eviction. It didn't go as they hoped. They said I didn't provide heat, so they went on a rent strike. Only they didn't file that with the courts or hold the money aside. They just thought they could stop paying rent. In court, Megan argued, "He never installed proper heating like he promised. We had a baby in there during winter." The judge asked, "Did you file for a formal rent strike? Did you place the rent money in escrow?" "Well, no," she admitted. "But we shouldn't have to pay for an uninhabitable place." What they put into the trailer was less than the rent. The judge agreed with me that seeing they took everything I was due those 2 months' rent, and the biggest. Tyler started slamming my character, so I said, "Well, you didn't tell me you were going to be going on house arrest when you rented the property." Before then, the judge looked bored, but he perked up. He asked them if that was true. They responded that it was, and he was ready to make his ruling. "This landlord is just trying to exploit us," Tyler exclaimed. "He's been unreasonable from day one. Is it true you failed to disclose your house arrest status when applying for the rental?" The judge interrupted. Tyler's face fell. "Yes, but that's not relevant to—" "I'll determine what's relevant," the judge cut him off. "I received 15 months back rent at $450 a month and $2,000 in damages because the way they removed the stuff, they damaged a lot of things." As for him, the judge said he had no choice but to turn the eviction over to his parole officer. Fast forward to this month, July 2025, his house arrest was violated and he was arrested. They actually had the nerve to ask me to speak on his behalf. I didn't. Ruling was his remaining 6 months are now being spent in jail. They have a bad eviction on their record and they owe me money. "Please," Megan called me begging, "just tell them you made a mistake about the eviction. Tyler doesn't deserve to be in jail." "I'm sorry," I replied. "But you both made your choices. You chose to not pay rent for over a year while spending money on other things. You chose to damage my property. These are the consequences. Know the law before you play the game." The next one is an entitled people story. Last summer started like any other at my family's lakefront property. We've owned this land for nearly 40 years, a beautiful 3-acre lot with a modest cabin that sits about 80 feet from the lake. The property's real treasure has always been the mature oak, maple, and pine trees that line the water's edge, creating a natural privacy screen while preventing erosion on our slightly sloped shoreline. I typically spend weekends there during summer, then close it up for winter around October. This past October, I did my usual winterizing routine, drained the pipes, covered the furniture, and made sure everything was secure before heading back to the city for the colder months. When I returned in April to open the place for spring, I immediately knew something was wrong. As I drove down the winding driveway, I could see the lake, way too much of the lake. The tree line that had defined our waterfront for decades was decimated. Someone had cut down nearly all the trees along our shoreline, 17 mature trees in total, some over 75 years old. I was in shock. The property looked naked, exposed. Where there had once been a beautiful canopy of green, there were now just ugly stumps and scattered debris. Even worse, I could already see signs of erosion beginning along the shoreline where the tree roots had previously held everything in place. I immediately called the police to report the trespassing and property damage. While waiting for them to arrive, I walked the property line, taking photos and trying to make sense of what had happened. That's when I noticed something. The view from the newly built mansion next door was now completely unobstructed. The trees that had partially blocked their lake view were gone. The police arrived and took my statement, but suggested this was mainly a civil matter unless we could prove who had done it. They recommended I speak with my neighbors to see if anyone had witnessed anything. Later that afternoon, I knocked on the door of the mansion next door. A man in his 50s answered, dressed in what I can only describe as casual rich guy attire, expensive jeans and a golf shirt that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Hi, I'm from next door. Someone cut down all the trees along my shoreline over the winter and I'm trying to figure out what happened," I explained. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. No surprise, no shock, just a slight frown before he replied, "Oh yes, I had those taken care of. They were blocking my lake view." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "You cut down my trees on my property without permission?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Look," he said with the confidence of someone who's never faced consequences. "Those trees were a nuisance. I paid good money for this view. Besides, they were half dead anyway. I did you a favor. Those trees were healthy on my property and now they're gone," I said. "That's illegal. You can't just cut down someone else's trees." He laughed dismissively. "It's just a few trees. What's the big deal? I'll throw you a couple grand if it'll make you feel better." I left before I said something I'd regret. Back home, I called a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. She arrived the next day to assess the damage. "This is about as clear-cut a case of timber trespass as I've ever seen," she said after viewing the property and my documentation. "In this state, there are specific statutes for tree cutting. The damages can be substantial, typically 3 times the replacement value of the trees." She recommended I get a certified arborist to assess the value of the destroyed trees. The arborist spent nearly a full day measuring stumps, taking samples, and documenting everything. His report was comprehensive: 17 trees cut down, all healthy, with an estimated replacement value of $125,000. Under our state's timber trespass laws, that meant potential damages of $375,000. My lawyer filed suit against my neighbor for timber trespass, property damage, and trespassing. We included the landscaping company he'd hired to do the cutting, but they quickly provided documentation showing my neighbor had signed a statement claiming the trees were on his property and that he had the right to remove them. When my neighbor received the lawsuit, his attitude changed instantly. He called me, alternating between threats and attempts at settlement. "This is ridiculous! No trees are worth that much!" Followed by, "Look, I'll give you $10,000 and we can forget this happened." I referred him to my lawyer and stopped answering his calls. The case never made it to trial. During discovery, we obtained text messages between my neighbor and the landscaping company where he specifically instructed them to cut the trees while the neighbor is away for winter, and acknowledged they weren't on his property. About a week before our court date, his lawyer reached out to discuss settlement. They offered $200,000. My lawyer pushed back, and we eventually settled for $325,000 plus the cost of professionally replanting the shoreline with saplings and installing erosion control measures. The replanting happened last month. The new trees are small, just saplings, and it'll be decades before they reach the majesty of what was lost. But the settlement money helped me add a nice addition to the cabin and set up a college fund for my kids. My neighbor sold his mansion 3 months after the settlement. I heard through local gossip that the legal bills and settlement wiped out a significant chunk of his retirement savings. The new owners seem nice. They've already come over to introduce themselves and apologize for what the previous owner did, even though it wasn't their fault. The most satisfying part was the county's response. After investigating the incident, they retroactively denied my former neighbor's variance request for his oversized dock, which had been provisionally approved the previous year. The new owners had to modify it at considerable expense. I've learned a valuable lesson about documenting property boundaries and keeping an eye on things even during the off-season. I've installed cameras around the property now, just in case. Those trees represented decades of growth and natural beauty that can't truly be replaced. But at least justice was served, and my former neighbor learned an expensive lesson. Views are nice, but respecting property rights is essential. The next one is a malicious compliance story. 20+ years ago now, I worked at a landscaping supply business driving a dump truck. I've been a software engineer for most of the time since, but at that time, well, mistakes were made and I spent a few years driving a truck. These were single-axle trucks, 26,000 pounds gross. We often overloaded them by about a ton. Mascoota was on the edge of the area we often delivered to, and we occasionally took rock or mulch to the high school there. I arrived one day with probably 4 or 5 tons of topsoil. If I recall correctly, I had to drive around the school and find someone. I suspect I had been instructed on where to meet people, and those people weren't there. I asked after the name I had on the delivery ticket. It was written on there like I should know who they were. When I found someone behind the school and was informed that it was a math or physics, I don't recall, but something STEM-related, teacher I was looking for. I think I asked that person if they could find the teacher for me. Eventually, I met the teacher and 3 or 4 students in front of the school. I didn't know any of them. I might have still been 19 or 20 at the time, and I looked young. It wasn't rare to be forced to find people for a delivery, and everything was normal so far. I got out of the truck and was told that the dirt was to be dumped into a planter they had been assembling with decorative blocks around the sign for the high school. It was out, maybe 50, into the grass between the road and the parking lot in front of the school. I hesitated and might have managed to say, before being interrupted. I was going to say that the truck would leave marks in the grass. The truck, at 12,000 pounds empty, was heavy enough that it would compress the dirt, and even though the grass would only be flattened, it would leave a trail anywhere the truck went, likely an inch or 2 deep that wouldn't go away anytime soon. The tracks would be conspicuous. I don't recall if I got more than 1 syllable out before I was interrupted with a condescending tone, initially from the teacher and then from 1 or 2 of the students. I tried to speak again, and again I was met with a mix of disbelief that I didn't understand the instructions, and further attempts to explain what they wanted me to do as though I was 5 years old or didn't speak English. I believe I attempted to speak 2 or 3 times before giving up. I acquiesced, got back in the truck, and proceeded to drive out into the grass, leaving ruts that the groundskeepers would regret for years to come. The grass will be cut off level above these ruts, but you'll still feel them when you drive over them with a mower. I backed the truck up to one side of the planter and dumped dirt in until it was piled above the small semi-oval retaining wall, and I was signaled to stop. The sign was in the middle of the planter, which meant that the pile was only on one side. The other side was pretty much empty. I expected that we would want to drive to the other side of planter. When you dump enough piles of something, you get a feel for what it's going to take to fill a space. But after being told to stop, I got out to suggest that they would want more dirt here to fill the entire planter. Again, I was not able to finish a sentence. I attempted to tell them that when they spread the dirt out in the planter, it wasn't going to be anywhere near the brim. I also would have been willing to stay while they moved some dirt over to the bare area so we could dump more in without spilling out onto the grass. It was clear they had no use for anything I might have to say. The disrespect was clearly intentional. I'm not sure if there was some perceived slight, or if this was just a wolf pack who did this to everyone. I was told to go dump the remaining soil. There was probably 2 or 3 tons left in the truck. It could have been put to good use in the planter still, out in a row crop field back behind the school. Here's another intricacy of working with a dump truck you might not intuit. Dirt doesn't spread evenly out of a dump bed. Most trucks have chains for the gate that allow you to meter how quickly the material comes out of the truck. These work great with small rock and gravel. With material that's more prone to clumping, you set the chains such that the gate can open wider and be less prone to clogging, but for dirt and mulch, it effectively just doesn't work. It hits the gate, compacts a bit, and is clogged. Then you can't release the chains because there are thousands of pounds of material pressed against it. You have to dig it out, which is a lot of work even with gravity helping, and of course the whole exercise was futile from the start. Thankfully, these people didn't know to ask, or I'm sure they would have directed me how to do my job, and then I would have been faced with either arguing with people who didn't care what I thought or setting the chains and then spending 10 minutes unclogging the gate of the truck. You might guess there's too much nuance in that to convey in a scenario where I've yet to be allowed to finish a sentence. We weren't having a conversation, and these people were enjoying this for some reason. This was a long time ago, and I don't remember much of what was said to me, but I do clearly remember one kid slowly explaining, "Just take the truck over there and drive while you dump it out." Or something to that effect. With hand gestures, like you would explain something to a child. By this point, I wouldn't piss on them if they were on fire, so I wasn't inclined to expose myself to any more of this noise. I had them sign for the delivery, and then drove around the school and into the field. I felt a little bad for whoever farmed this field, so I actually did try to make it work as well as possible. I also doubted they had permission. I drove about as fast as I was willing to drive in a recently tilled field, and started raising the bed. As topsoil is wont to do, nothing happened until the entire mass started sliding and essentially landed in the field in a large pile. You could tell that, if you knew what you were looking at. The truck had been moving when it was dumped, but it was still a pile that someone was going to have to deal with. I drove past the school a week or so later on another delivery. I was curious to see if they had gone out to the field to get some of the nice sifted topsoil when they realized the planter was barely half filled, or to maybe use it to patch the ruts in the grass. There were still obvious tracks leading to the newly constructed planter. The planter was half filled with dirt, leaving the back of multiple courses of block exposed, and the large pile of dirt was still standing out in the field. The planter stayed that way for years. I don't know if anyone ever fixed it. The entire complex was apparently demolished and has been replaced with a new building now. I moved out of the area a long time ago. I'm not entirely certain that this was malicious compliance. I wasn't trying to be malicious, but I wasn't going to argue with people who were being both insulting and borderline hostile. I held that job way too long, maybe 6 years, so I certainly had more bad or weird encounters with customers. Like the time I guess I disappointed a couple trying to have a delivery man three-way. But this one was one of the worst. The next one is an entitled people story. So here's a tale of light chaos, mom group politics, and one very entitled mom. My daughter's 8th birthday party was supposed to be a fun, big celebration, but due to unusual circumstances in our neck of the woods, we had to cancel everything. Once everything has calmed down, I still wanted her to have some kind of party. She'd been through a lot, as did the other kids. The original plan, which involved a special location with a big attraction, was no longer possible, so I decided to throw the party at our home and invite just the girls in her class. That was still 23 kids, which I had to entertain myself, but I was willing to do it to make her happy. I sent an invite in the girls' moms group, time, place, everything. Everyone responded with, "Of course, and we'll be there." Great. A few days later, someone messages the group, "Does anyone know when the hip-hop concert is?" Turns out it's on the exact same day. Only 2 of the girls are performing in it, so it wasn't a huge deal. These things happen. Then one of the moms, let's call her entitled mom or EM, chimes in with, "How about you change the time so my daughter can come to the birthday?" Now, I wasn't angry. Honestly, she wanted to make it work so her daughter could celebrate with mine, and that's sweet in theory. But the other moms were horrified. Because who asks someone to reschedule their child's party for them? Still, I figured fine, let's try to make it work. I told her, just bring your daughter and the other girl a little earlier. I'd give them their party favors, do a bit of the activity early, make sure they got a nice moment. Everyone would be happy. The day of the party arrives. I am beside myself, trying to set up the party in time for the early arrivals as well as the rest of the party. EM starts calling me, telling me about how difficult all this is for her. She has a ton of stuff to get done. Blah, blah, blah. I am literally on the floor duct taping a plastic table cover for the activity. Eventually, I am fed up and tell her that I am kinda busy. Then EM tells me after wasting more of my time, she will be late for the early time she requested. The other mom, not entitled mom, comes early with her daughter, stays with her, helps out, is super thankful and appreciative. Great energy. EM keeps calling me for dumb stuff and to vent to me, eventually shows up late, drops her daughter off, screams to me from the window of her car that her dad will pick her up and drives away. Both me and the other mom are shocked. Then her dad shows up to pick the daughter up an hour later and calls me to bring her downstairs. I told him, I'm in the middle of hosting the party. I was not clear enough. He said, just send her down. The girl goes out, then comes back crying. She is too scared. At this point, I am ready to choke them both. Only after I called him did he deign to get out of his car and come take his daughter. So not only did I have to do a double start to the party and juggle everything for the early birds, which really messed me up, I shouldn't have done it, I also got constant texts and calls from EM and her ex while trying to manage 20 excited girls. Still, my daughter was happy, especially because those girls are close friends. So I sucked it up and told myself, whatever, it's about her, not me. Now here's where the entitlement really peaks. In my community, we have a system that's considered both eco-friendly and financially responsible. Instead of everyone buying gifts, most of which are plastic junk, the parents agree on a modest amount to transfer digitally. Like Venmo, it lets the kids pool the funds for one meaningful gift and avoids waste and pressure. Some still prefer to give a physical gift, which is great. They get to enjoy both worlds. So EM apparently didn't give a gift, but I didn't notice or care. I do not keep count. My daughter never checks who gave what. She was thrilled just to be with her friends. But a few days later, I get a text from EM. Oh no, I totally forgot to give your daughter a gift. What does she prefer, money or something physical? I told her, whatever is easiest for you. I genuinely meant it. She said she'd send money. She never did. Not a gift either. Not a peep or a thank you. And I still don't care. She obviously needs this money more than my daughter for medicine. But really, the nerve. Ask me to reschedule an entire party to accommodate you. Be late to your own requested time. Drop your kid off and leave me to manage her more than any other girl. Not give a gift, then bring it up yourself, and then still not doing it. Just needed to vent. My girl had the time of her life and is oblivious to my frustrations. The next one is an entitled parent story. I'm a bit fuzzy on the details now, blocked memories and all that, but I remember one day after working at a restaurant from 6:30 a.m. to 6 p.m., no lunch, barista, bartender, server, and dish pig, my dad cornered me and said since I was so rich, I wasn't. I was a manager making less than the junior staff. I should pay him back on all the child support my mother stole from him. He then showed me the letters he kept, and with the way he went on and on over the year, I expected it to be thousands per month. Sure, I went to private school, but they chose to send me there before they even got divorced. The plan had originally been to go there from pre-primary, but they missed the cutoff, so I went from year 7, 12. Also, the cost for the school was done separately, outside of child support. So what it was used for was uniforms, swimming lessons, healthcare/Medicare, phone plan, until I turned 16. Then I paid for my own with help from Mum to top it off occasionally as I used my phone as a hotspot so my sister could do homework. Dad didn't want to pay for Wi-Fi as we would waste it, long story. The rest they dealt with on their own / just paid it if it was their week, so basically. He paid duck all, about $15 to $20 per week for 2 kids. For a year I listed to him, guilt me on it, try and twist us against our mum, and sometimes it worked. Have him say he couldn't afford food because of us, all to find out he paid practically nothing. He worked as a locksmith and then a motorbike mechanic in a specialized area, then went back to being a locksmith. I'm not in contact with him now, obviously. My sister lives with him still, but we're fine. She comes over to stay at mine pretty often, mostly for the Wi-Fi, but she prefers Dad's to Mum, as she has issues with our mum. Longer story there. He just took my sister OB a week-long trip to Bali. All expenses paid. She's 20 and hasn't had a job for over a year. When I last lived with him, I was the cook, the cleaner, the caretaker of my sister, the dog walker, and the person putting myself in the middle deliberately to avoid hospital visits / animal abuse. But yeah, that my dad, a begging man child. Anyway, thank you for watching.